I'm moving forward every day, Jesus. I just let him lead the way every second, every minute, every hour of the day. I'm moving with Jesus every day, 24/7. With Jesus every day, 24/7. I'm moving with Jesus. I'm moving with Jesus every day.
Why do you argue? Well, why does anybody argue for that matter? I suppose it is safe to say and fair to say that each of us would argue because we believe that we are right and the other party is wrong, and the other party feels the same way. But how do we go about establishing who is right or wrong in any argument? How do we establish who is right and wrong, period? The question, therefore, is how do we establish what is absolutely right and what is absolutely wrong? Well, to help us unravel this philosophical conundrum, I've invited two esteemed individuals who will help us treat with this whole matter of absolutely and absolutely not. On the panel here is Pastor Gandalal Samdal Singh. He is a pastor of 25 years experience, and he has been teaching the law, so he must be qualified to tell us something about what is absolutely right and absolutely wrong. And next to him, incidentally, is an attorney at law for the past 10 years. We're happy to have you, Randall Hector, to join with us on JC 24/7. I think I want to pose this first question to you. Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Before we get into the whole duty of man, let us begin by defining what is law. How do you go about defining law?
Well, let me use a simple definition because laws exist in almost every social institution,
Right.
whether it's children playing catch on the playground or the government enacting laws. It really comes back to one simple basis. So it's this, a simple definition I'll use, which says that law is a system of rules that are created and enforced through social or governmental institutions. The reason I phrase it like that is because for children to play any game, you need to have rules to
Right.
operate within. In the same way, when the government does it, it regulates the way that we act, behave,
Okay.
everything that we do.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Pastor, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I will try to be not so simple.
I don't expect you to be.
Yes, and when I think of law, I think of a body of standards
Right.
that will either allow people to function in a certain way
Right.
or prohibit them
Right.
from functioning in a certain way. So if I should offer a definition here, it is a rule enacted or customary in a community and recognized as enjoining or prohibiting certain actions and enforced by the imposition of penalties.
Have mercy. I could see why you say it would not be that simple. That's a very complex definition, but I think we get the gist of it. Based on that definition, Pastor, would you say that there is a difference between law and instinct?
Yes, certainly,
Okay.
because law is a set standard of principles, whereas instinct, people or human beings operate out of and act without conscious intention.
Okay. Okay. As a spin off to that question, Mr. Hector, would you say when it comes to obedience, is it in our nature to be obedient or in our nurture? Are we nurtured to be obedient, or can you say that we have in our DNA this inclination to be obedient?
Well, you've asked a very difficult question, Pastor.
Well, I'm asking an attorney.
I would say it's both.
Okay.
And let me explain why.
All right.
The Bible tells us that in Genesis that we were created in the image of God. It means that when we were created in that image, we were created to yearn after and to seek after those things that came from God.
Right.
But we learned thereafter that sin entered the world,
Sure.
and we didn't start to trust God anymore. We no longer obeyed God anymore. This is why later on, when David was writing in the Psalms, he would have told us, and this is after his sin with Bathsheba, that he was born in sin and shaped in iniquity.
Okay.
Which leads us to realize that there are things that I will do wrong naturally. But even though he does things wrong naturally, he still had that yearning to seek after God's face.
Okay.
So that's why I say it's both.
Right, I hear that.
Because he yearns after God. But because something went wrong,
Right.
he goes astray.
Right.
So he has to be nurtured to come back to the
I
right
hear you.
path.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Romans 6:16 seems to shake hands with what you are saying, where Paul says, he to whom you yield yourself servants to obey, his servants you are,
That's
to
right.
whomever you obey. In other words, you cannot not be a servant or a slave.
That's right.
When sin entered, I suppose we changed masters.
That's right.
Our first master was God, but now sin has come and we are now serving sin. However, in order to serve sin, we still have to be obedient. We just have changed masters.
Yeah.
So obedience is part of our DNA. It's just that sin has messed up who we should obey.
Yeah.
Therefore, Pastor, do you suggest, and I'm going to read a statement to you and tell me whether you agree or not. It's a very simple question, true or false. There is absolutely need for law and order in any society. Do you agree?
Well, I in full agreement with that question.
I would hope so.
Yes.
You are a pastor, right?
Surely. I mean, wherever people exist, whether it is in the workplace, in the play field,
Right,
or even in a religious body,
right,
there are always laws that will govern how you operate and how
Right.
you function in that environment.
right,
So there is definitely the need for law and order.
right. Well, attorney at law, Mr. Hector, who determines if we are establishing that there is absolute need for law and order? The question is, and it's an obvious question at that, who determines which laws are to be obeyed in any society?
Well, if you're asking me as an attorney at law, the answer, of course, will be the legislature.
Right,
It will be the government. Also, it will be the courts that interpret laws and define what the laws that are passed in Parliament actually mean. And they create what is known as the common law or case law. And so, from that perspective, the Parliament,
right,
primarily, and the courts determine what laws we follow.
right.
But I imagine that your question is a bit deeper than that simple answer.
Of course, because we're looking at absolute laws now, or laws that are absolute.
Now, any lawyer will tell you that, especially when you speak of rights, for example,
Sure.
there are no absolute rights.
According to,
So, according to case law.
okay, hear you.
So, for example, you have the right to life. But if you commit murder in our jurisdiction, the only penalty is death by hanging. Now, can't you argue that the government is breaching your rights by hanging you?
I hear you. Interesting.
The thing is, there's another law that, under our constitution, another right which says that you have the right to due process. So, in this circumstance, your right to life is not absolute. What you have, however, is a right to due process. And as long as due process is followed, then your right to life can be taken away.
Right.
So in that circumstance, the states and the state's laws have inherent inconsistencies.
Okay.
Right? Because there will always be competing interests.
Right.
And that's why I pointed out those two. There will be competing interests to determine what should take prominence.
Right.
That is important because unlike human beings that have these internal conflicts, God's laws don't have those conflicts.
I hear you. And praise God for that.
The Bible tells us that God doesn't change. And we should be thankful for that.
Right.
Because human beings change
That's right.
all the time.
Right.
So things that were lawful or unlawful previously, we would see nowadays are lawful.
Right.
And you'll ask yourself why. And the reason all comes down to the philosophies that men have.
Right.
What do we see now as being right and wrong,
Right.
as opposed to what we saw in the past as being right and wrong?
I suppose we can therefore say that for a Christian to live in a society like this, there is going to be inevitable conflict,
There must be.
right? Because, I mean, he believes in a law governed by a God who cannot change.
That's right.
Or instituted by a God who cannot change. Not that he does not, but he cannot change. And now he lives in a society where law seems to be, well, we live in a society where there is a law of relativism, where things change, or situation ethics,
That's right.
depending on how things are. Therefore, it brings this question, and this is perhaps one of the critical questions in this argument. Should a Christian, in his obedience to the law of God, offend someone else, or in his obedience, yes, let's say he offends someone else, can that person be justified in calling the Christian, or, in saying that he is discriminated against?
Well, there are many misinterpretations or misrepresentations of who a Christian really is. And a simple definition, a Christian is someone who follows Christ, who patterns his or her life according to the characteristics of Jesus.
Right.
Now, sometimes, based upon your position as a Christian, you may have to act or live your life in a way that may conflict with the lifestyle of other people. And you may sometimes have to take decisions and make choices that may be inconsistent with the prevailing norms of society.
Wow.
And in such a case, it may appear as if you may discriminate against someone. But for the Christian, that person has to determine whether he or she will please God or please society.
Right.
And that's the big question.
Beautiful. I would really like to get Mr. Hector's response on that, particularly as it relates to the word discrimination. How do we go about defining that word discrimination? We'll take a break right here, and then we'll come back and continue our discussion on this particular question as we look at absolutely and absolutely not. We will be right back, and that's absolutely right. we continue our discussion on absolutely and absolutely not. And before we took the break, Mr. Hector, we were looking at this whole question of discrimination. Should a Christian's actions or his efforts to be obedient offend someone else? Should that person feel comfortable in saying that the Christian is discriminating against him? And my first question I want to ask as it relates to that issue is, what or how do we go about defining discrimination as it relates to the Christian?
All right. Well, let me use a simple dictionary definition once again. Discrimination can be described as or defined as the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people.
Right.
Now, inherent in the concept is that of being unjust. Remember earlier, I'd have indicated that a Christian believes in a God who cannot change.
Right.
So, if a Christian's beliefs are fixed,
Right.
and society's beliefs change around him,
Right.
I don't see it as being a legitimate position
Right.
that a Christian is being unjust or unfair
I hear you.
when based on his own right to freedom of belief.
Right. Okay.
You see? Because you have a right to hold such religious beliefs as you deem fit. If a Christian is unable to change those beliefs, then I don't see it as being legitimate to say that they're being unjust when they refuse to change from an immutable standard.
Beautiful. But therefore, could the words offend and discrimination be subjective? Highly subjective. I feel offended,
Yes.
therefore I'm offended.
You know, there's a popular saying that only the truth offends. So we live in a society now, and you know there are many big words that we call it in a postmodern era, where we believe that what is most important is the way that we feel, and oftentimes objective truth gets pushed out of the door.
Right.
I think that is one of the main challenges facing Christians in these times. When you say that I am bound by these rules, and everyone is saying, well, no, you are being intolerant. You need to change to see our point of view. Now, if someone is presenting you with that position, then aren't they guilty of the same thing they are accusing you of?
Beautiful, beautiful. Pastor, how you relate to that question about discrimination?
Well, people are free to choose and to think how they feel. But how a person feels does not necessarily mean that that's exactly how it is.
Okay, beautiful,
Yes?
beautiful.
So that not everybody who think that they are discriminated against may really and truly be discriminated against.
I hear you.
A person may, for example, a Christian may hold a position based upon his or her conviction
Right,
and may practice his religion based upon his or her conviction.
right.
That does not really mean that that person is discriminating against someone else
I hear you.
who may have a different conviction.
I hear you. Beautiful. Let's switch the coin a little bit. How tolerant should a Christian be of someone who is either callous when it comes to obeying the law or even indifferent to the law? How tolerant should he be of that when he sees blatantly that somebody is going against what the law of his God states?
When we look at God, not every human being subscribes to the law of God. Yet, the scripture tells us that God sends rain upon everyone. He sends his sunshine upon everyone. So God does not discriminate against anybody. God is not callous, or God is not intolerant towards human beings. So that Christians who proclaim that they are following God and they are serving Christ should learn to coexist with people in society without, you understand, being callous or intolerant towards them.
But we need to also be careful to remember that tolerance does not mean agreement.
Okay.
Tolerance does not mean support.
Surely.
So there are some people who confuse those two by telling you that being tolerant means that you need to support certain positions.
Right.
That's not true. Paul tells us that, as far as possible,
Right.
should live peaceably
Right.
with all men.
Right.
Within that, there is the underlying message that there are sometimes you won't be peaceable with all men.
That's right. That's right.
But even though you're not living peaceably with them, that doesn't mean you can't extend to them Christian love and affection.
Right.
Because the purpose for all your actions really should be trying to bring them into a loving relationship with God.
Beautiful. Even in the book of Romans chapter 1, when Paul was enumerating the ills of society and how God is going to pronounce his wrath upon them, he says not only upon those who do them, but those who actually take pleasure in those who do the acts. So you could be guilty by just, taking pleasure in looking at it. Society has become very lawless. Our society and the global society has become and is becoming lawless. Do you think people's obedience to the law of God is going to reduce incidents of crime and criminal activities in our society? Do you firmly believe that?
Surely.
Okay.
I believe that one of the reasons why crime is so prevalent in our society is because human beings have disregarded the law of God. And if we should accept and practice the law of God, you understand, we would have no crime, no violence in society.
Somebody says, Pastor, you're being biased and prejudiced by saying that because I may not be a law of God abiding as a citizen, but I don't commit crime. You are saying if they're obedient to the law of your God, how do you separate that from those of us who don't believe in your God but are not criminals?
There are some people who practice the law of God unknowingly that they are practicing the law of God. So that, for example, if as a citizen of this country, I am not involved in misrepresentation, I'm not involved in fraud or any criminal activity, I am practicing the law of God.
Have mercy.
If I am not committing murder, I am practicing the law of God.
Right. Mr. Hector, do you believe people were born with that, were created, I should say, with that desire to obey the law of God?
Of course I do. And, what Pastor Sam Lansing said here is really mirrors what Paul says in Romans 2:15, where he says that the Gentiles, as he referred to them, even though they didn't have the law of God, it was written in their hearts.
Have mercy.
So they did the law of God without being told the law of God. Now, but I just want to carry you back to the question you asked Pastor Sam Lansing a while ago, where you said if society, if we would be different if we follow the laws of God.
Right.
And I just want to use two commandments. The first commandment, you shall have no other gods. Because if you have no other gods but God, then what he tells you, you will do.
Right.
And then I want to go to the last commandment.
Right.
Thou shalt not covet.
Right.
If you'd never covet, you would not steal. You won't want to take. You won't have corrupt officials.
Right.
You won't have the society that we live in.
Sure.
Covetousness is an interesting commandment because it really deals with inside here.
Right.
Yeah.
You wanting more and more. And it really stems from the selfish nature of human beings.
Right.
Which underlies all of the ills in society.
Beautiful. I'm happy you quoted that particular commandment because, the Hebrews saw the word God differently from how we perceive it. In their minds, the word God literally means authority.
Yeah.
And, of course, plural God is the plural intensive, this big authority. And when God says you shall not have any other authority, he was actually speaking to our question today. No other person should claim the right to be absolute outside of me. So don't you have any other authority but me. And when I am your authority, those things become inherent inside of you. Why do you believe as a Christian that the law of God is supreme to any other law and constitutes the whole duty of man?
When we look at the law of God, the first 6 laws relate to our relationship with God.
You're talking about the 10 Commandments.
The 10 Commandments.
Okay.
The first 4.
First 4,
sorry,
right.
the first 4.
Right.
And the other 6
Right.
would relate to relationship between human beings.
Very good.
And when we look at the laws that are made by the legislature, which is the parliament, most of those laws are predicated on the law of God. Enshrined there is the respect for human life and the regard for human life. So that the laws of God really are very important, not just for Christians, but for everybody in the world,
Right. Okay.
including governments and politicians and religious people.
Right. Some of whom are making other kinds of laws besides establishing the law of God.
Sure.
And you believe that if we obey God's law, we will be better off. Mr. Hector, you want to say something to
Let me just add one thing. It's my favorite text in the Bible.
Okay.
It comes from Micah chapter 6 and verse 8. Let me just give it in an abbreviated fashion. Prophet here is saying, what does the Lord require of us? And he answers the question by saying, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Right.
If each and every person were to do those things, we would live in a completely different Trinidad and Tobago, and a completely different world. Because that requires us to be fair, to be kind, to be loving, to esteem others highly, to forgive them when they have wronged us, and to recognize that we are subject to a supreme being who is so loving and caring to us. And because God has showed us that sort of love, is the kind of love we should show to everyone else.
Beautiful. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. I know we only touched the surface, but I think we got the word out that God must be supreme in the lives of each person, and he will be supreme in the life of every nation. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Should we love God? Absolutely. Should we obey him? Absolutely. Should we yield ourselves to him? Absolutely. Should we reject him? Absolutely not. And if you do this, if you fear God, you will see the difference he will make in your life. But you don't have to take my word for it. Try it and try him for yourself, and you will see that he will be God 24/7 in your life. Thank you for taking time to be with us. We look forward again to having you join us. Have a good one.
Thank you for viewing JC 24/7. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and remember to inspire your living as you prepare for heaven. You can get it all on JC 24/7.